Chapter 1 of The Return of the Mucker by Edgar Burroughs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joe DeNoia, Somerset, New Jersey. The Return of the Mucker by Edgar Burroughs. The Murder Trial. Billy Byrne squared his broad shoulders and filled his deep lungs with the familiar medium which is known as air in Chicago. He was standing upon the platform of a New York Central train that was pulling into the LaSalle Street station, and though the young man was far from happy, something in the nature of content pervaded his being, for he was coming home. After something more than a year of world wandering and strange adventure, Billy Byrne was coming back to the great West Side and Grand Avenue. Now there was not much upon either side or down the center of long and tortuous Grand Avenue to arouse enthusiasm, nor was Billy particularly enthusiastic about that more or less squalid thoroughfare. The thing that exalted Billy was the idea that he was coming back to show them. He was left under a cloud and with a reputation of genuine toughness and rowdyism that had seen few parallels even in the ungentle district of his birth and upbringing. A girl had changed him. She was as far removed from Billy's sphere as the stars themselves, but Billy had loved her and learned from her, and in trying to become more as he knew the men of her class were, he had sloughed off much of the uncouthness that had always been a part of him and all of the rowdyism. Billy Byrne was no longer the mucker. He had given her up because he imagined the gulf between Grand Avenue and Riverside Drive to be unbridgeable, but he still clung to the ideas that she had awakened in him. He still sought to be all that she might wish him to be, even though he realized that he should never see her again. Grand Avenue would be the easiest place to forget his sorrow. Her he could never forget. And then his newly awakened pride urged him back to the haunts of his former life that he might, as he would put it himself, show them. He wanted the gang to see that he, Billy Byrne, wasn't afraid to be decent. He wanted some of the neighbors to realize that he could work steadily and earn an honest living, and he looked forward with delight to the pleasure and satisfaction of rubbing it in some of the saloon keepers and bartenders who had helped keep him drunk some 5 days out of 7, for Billy didn't drink anymore. But most of all he wanted to vindicate himself in the eyes of the once hated law. He wanted to clear his record of the unjust charge of murder which had sent him scurrying out of Chicago over a year before. That night that patrolman Stanley Lasky of the Lake Street station had tipped him off that Sheehan had implicated him in the murder of old man Schneider. Now Billy Byrne had not killed Schneider. He had been nowhere near the old feller's saloon at the time of the holdup, but Sheehan, who had been arrested and charged with the crime, was an old enemy of Billy's, and Sheehan had seen a chance to divert some of the suspicion from himself and square accounts with Billy at the same time. The new Billy Byrne was ready to accept at face value everything which seemed to belong in any way to the environment of that exalted realm where dwelt the girl he loved. Law, order, and justice appeared to Billy in a new light since he had rubbed elbows with the cultured and refined. He no longer distrusted or feared them. They would give him what he sought, a square deal. It seemed odd to Billy that he should be seeking anything from the law or its minions. For years he had waged a perpetual battle with both. Now he was coming back voluntarily to give himself up, with every conviction that he should be exonerated quickly. Billy, knowing his own innocence, realizing his own integrity, assumed that others must immediately appreciate both. First, thought Billy, I'll go take a look at little old Grand Avenue. Then I'll give myself up. The trial may take a long time, and if it does I want to see some of the old bunch first. So Billy entered an L coach, and leaning on the sill of an open window watched grimy Chicago rattle past, until the guards, Grand Avenue, announced the end of his journey. Maggie Shane was sitting on the upper step of the long flight of stairs which leaned precariously against the scarred face of the frame residence, upon the second floor front of which the lairs and pennants of the Shane family are crowded into 3 ill-smelling rooms. It was Saturday and Maggie was off. She sat there rather disconsolate, for there was a dearth of beaux for Maggie, none having arisen to fill the aching void left by the sudden departure of Coke Sheehan, since that worthy gentleman had sought a more salubrious clime, to the consternation of both Maggie Shane and Mr. Sheehan's bondsman. Maggie scowled down upon the frowsy street filled with frowsy women and frowsy children. She scowled upon the street cars rumbling by with their frowsy loads. Occasionally she varied the monotony by drawing out her chewing gum to wondrous lengths, holding one end between a thumb and finger and the other between her teeth. Presently Maggie spied a rather pleasing figure sauntering up the sidewalk upon her side of the street. The man was far too away for her to recognize his features, but his size and bearing and general appearance appealed to the lonesome Maggie. She hoped it was someone she knew, or with whom she might easily become acquainted, for Maggie was bored to death. She patted the hair at the back of her head and righted the mop which hung over one eye. Then she rearranged her skirts and waited. As the man approached, she saw that he was better looking than she had even dared to hope, and that there was something extremely familiar about his appearance. It was not, though, until he was almost in front of the house that he looked up at the girl and she recognized him. Then Maggie Shane gasped and clutched the handrail at her side. An instant later the man was past and continuing his way along the sidewalk. Maggie Shane glared after him for a minute, then she quickly ran down the stairs and into a grocery store a few doors west, where she had asked if she might use the telephone. "Give me West 2063, she demanded of the operator, and a moment later, "Is this Lake Street?" "Well, say, Billy Byrne's back. I just see him." "Yes, and he never mind who I am. But if youse want him, he's walking west on Grand Avenue right now. I just this minute seen him near Lincoln," and she smashed the receiver back into the hook. Billy Byrne thought that he would look in on his mother. Not that he expected to be welcomed even though she might happen to be sober, or not that he cared to see her. But Billy's whole manner of thought had altered within the year, and something now seemed to tell him that it was his duty to do the things that he contemplated. Maybe he might even be of help to her. But when he reached the gloomy neighborhood in which his childhood had been spent, it was to learn that his mother was dead, and that another family occupied the tumble-down cottage that had been his home. If Billy Byrne felt any sorrow because of his mother's death, he did not reveal it outwardly. He owed her nothing but for kicks and cuffs received, and for the surroundings and influences that had started upon a life of crime at an age when most boys were just entering grammar school. Really, the man was relieved that he had not had to see her, and it was with a lighter step that he turned back to retrace his way along Grand Avenue. No one of the few he had met who recognized him had seemed particularly delighted at his return. The whole affair had been something of a disappointment. Therefore, Billy determined to go on at once to the Lake Street station and learn the status of the Schneider murder case. Possibly they had discovered the real murderer, and if that was the case, Billy would be permitted to go his way. But if not, then he can give himself up and ask for a trial, that he might be exonerated. As he neared Wood Street, two men who had been watching his approach stepped into the doorway of a saloon, and as he passed they stepped out again behind him. One upon either side, they seized him. Billy turned to remonstrate. "Come easy now, Byrne," admonished one of them, "and don't make no fuss." "Oh," said Billy, "it's you, is it? Well, I was just going over to the station to give myself up." Both men laughed skeptically. "We'll just save you the trouble," said one of them. "We'll take you over. You might lose your way if you tried to go alone." Billy went along in silence the rest of the way to where the patrol waited at another corner. He saw there was nothing to be gained by talking to these detectives, but he found the lieutenant equally inclined to doubt his intentions. He, too, only laughed when Billy assured him that he was on his way to the station at the very instant of arrest. As the weeks dragged along and Billy Byrne found no friendly interest in himself or his desire to live on the square, and no belief in his protestations that he had naught to do with the killing of Schneider, he began to have his doubts as to the wisdom of his act. He also commenced to entertain some of his former opinions of the police, and of the law of which they are supposed to be the guardians. A cellmate told him that the papers had scored the department heavily for their failure to apprehend the murderer of the inoffensive old Schneider, and that public opinion had been so aroused that a general police shake-up had followed. The result was that the police were keen to fasten the guilt upon someone. They did not care whom, so long as it was someone who was in their custody. "You may not have done it," ventured the cellmate, "but they'll send you up for it if they can't hang you. They're going to try to get the death sentence. They hain't got no love for you, Byrne. You caused them a lot of trouble in your day, and they haven't forgot it. I'd hate to be in your boots." Billy Byrne shrugged. Where were his dreams of justice? They seemed to have faded back into the old distrust and hatred. He shook himself and conjured in his mind the vision of a beautiful girl who had believed in him and trusted him, who had inculcated within him a love for all that was finest and best in true manhood, for the very things that he had most hated all the years of his life before she had come into his existence to alter it in him. And then Billy would believe again, believe that in the end justice would triumph, and that it would all come out all right, just the way he had pictured it. With the coming of the last day of the trial, Billy found it more and more difficult to adhere to his regard for law, order, and justice. The prosecution had shown conclusively that Billy was a hard customer. The police had brought witnesses who did not hesitate to perjure themselves in their testimony which it seemed to Billy the densest of jurymen could plainly see had been framed up and learned by rote until it was letter perfect. These witnesses could recall with startling accuracy every detail that had occurred between 17 minutes after 8 and 21 minutes past 9 on the night of September 23rd, over a year before. But where they had been and what they had done 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later, or where they were at 9 o'clock in the evening last Friday, they couldn't for the lives of them remember. and Billy was practically without witnesses. The result was a foregone conclusion. Even Billy had to admit it, and when the prosecuting attorney demanded the death penalty, the prisoner had an uncanny sensation as of the tightening of a hempen rope around his neck. As he waited for the jury to return its verdict, Billy sat in his cell trying to read a newspaper which a kindly guard had given him, but his eyes persisted in boring through the white paper and the black type to scenes that were not in any paper. He saw a turbulent river tumbling through a savage world, and in the swirl of the water lay a little island, and he saw a man there upon the island, and a girl. The girl was teaching the man to speak the language of the cultured, and to view life as people of refinement view it. She taught him what honor meant among her class, and that it was better to lose any other possession rather than lose honor. Billy realized that it was these lessons that had spurred him to the mad scheme that was to end now with a verdict of guilty. He had wished to vindicate his honor. A hard laugh broke from his lips, but instantly he sobered and his face softened. It had been for her sake after all, and what mattered if they did send him to the gallows? He had not sacrificed his honor, he had done his best to assert it. He was innocent. They could kill him, but they couldn't make him guilty. 1,000 juries pronouncing him so could not make it true that he had killed Schneider. But it would be hard, after all his hopes, after all the plans he had made to live square, to show them. His eyes, still boring through the paper, suddenly found themselves attracted by something in the text before them. A name. Harding. Billy shook himself and commenced to read. The marriage of Barbara, daughter of Anthony Harding, the multimillionaire, to William Mallory will take place on the 25th of June. The article was dated in New York. There was more, but Billy did not read it. He had read enough. It is true that he had urged her to marry Mallory, but now, in his lonesomeness and friendlessness, he felt almost as though she had been untrue to him. Come along, Byrne, a bailiff interrupted his thoughts. The jury's reached a verdict. The judge was emerging from his chambers as Billy was led into the courtroom. Presently the jury filed in and took their seats. The foreman handed the clerk a bit of paper. Even before it was read, Billy knew that he had been found guilty. He did not care any longer, so he told himself. He hoped that the judge would send him to the gallows. There was nothing more in life for him now anyway. He wanted to die, but instead he was sentenced to life imprisonment in the penitentiary at Joliet. This was infinitely worse than death. Billy Byrne was appalled at the thought of remaining for life within the grim stone walls of a prison. Once more there swept over him all the old, unreasoning hatred of the law and all that pertained to it. He would like to close his steel fingers about the fat neck of the red-faced judge. The smug juryman roused within him the lust to kill. Justice! Billy Byrne laughed aloud. A bailiff rapped for order. One of the jurymen leaned close to a neighbor and whispered, "A hardened criminal," he said. "Society will be safer when he is behind the bars." The next day they took Billy aboard a train bound for Joliet. He was handcuffed to a deputy sheriff. Billy was calm outwardly, but inwardly he was a raging volcano of hate. In a certain very beautiful home on Riverside Drive, New York City, a young lady, comfortably backed by downy pillows, sat in her bed and alternated her attention between coffee and rolls and a morning paper. On the inside of the main sheet a heading claimed her languid attention: Chicago murderer given life sentence. Of late Chicago had aroused in Barbara Harding a greater proportion of interest than ever it had in the past, and so it was that she now permitted her eyes to wander casually down the printed column. Murderer of harmless old saloon keeper is finally brought to justice. The notorious West Side rowdy Billy Byrne, apprehended after more than a year as fugitive from justice, is sent to Joliet for life. Barbara Harding sat stony-eyed and cold for what seemed many minutes. Then with a stifled sob she turned and buried her face in the pillows. The train bearing Billy Byrne and the deputy sheriff toward Joliet had covered perhaps half the distance between Chicago and Billy's permanent destination when it occurred to the deputy sheriff that he should like to go into the smoker and enjoy a cigar. Now, from the moment that he had been sentenced, Billy Byrne's mind had been centered upon one thought: escape. He knew that there probably would not be the slightest chance for escape, but nevertheless the idea was always uppermost in his thoughts. His whole being revolted, not alone against the injustice which had sent him into life imprisonment, but at the thought of the long years of awful monotony which lay ahead of him. He could not endure them. He would not. The deputy sheriff rose and, motioning his prisoner ahead of him, started for the smoker. It was 2 cars ahead. The train was vestibuled. The first platform they crossed was tightly enclosed, but at the second Billy saw that a careless porter had left one of the doors open. The train was slowing down for some reason. It was going, perhaps, 20 miles an hour. Billy was the first upon the platform. He was the first to see the open door. It meant one of 2 things: a chance to escape or death. Even the latter was to be preferred to life imprisonment. Billy did not hesitate an instant. Even before the deputy sheriff realized that the door was open, his prisoner had leapt from the moving train, dragging his guard after him. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Return of the Mucker by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Joe DeNoia, Somerset, New Jersey. The Escape. Byrne had no time to pick any particular spot to jump for. When he did jump, he might have been directly over a picket fence or a bottomless pit. He did not know. Nor did he care. As it happened, he was over neither. The platform chanced to be passing across a culvert at that instant. Beneath the culvert was a slimy pool. Into this the two men plunged, alighting unharmed. Byrne was the first to regain his feet. He dragged the deputy sheriff to his knees, and before that frightened and astonished officer of the law could gather his wits together, he had been relieved of his revolver and found himself looking into its cold and businesslike muzzle. Then Billy Byrne waded ashore, prodding the deputy sheriff in the ribs with cold steel and warning him to silence. Above the pool stood a little wood, thick with tangled wildwood. Into this Byrne forced his prisoner. When they had come deep enough into the concealment of the foliage to make discovery from the outside improbable, Byrne halted. "Now say your prayers," he commanded. "I'm not going to croak you." The deputy sheriff looked up at him in wild-eyed terror. "My God," he cried, "I ain't done nothing to you, Byrne. Haven't I always been your friend? What have I ever done to you? For God's sake, Byrne, you ain't going to murder me, are you?" "They'll get you sure." Billy Byrne let a rather unpleasant smile curl his lips. "No," he said, "youse ain't done nothing to me. But you stand for the law, damn it. And I'm gonna croak everything I meet that stands for the law. They wanted to send me up for life. Me, an innocent man. Your kind done it, the cops. You ain't no cop, but you're just as rotten. Now say your prayers." He leveled the revolver at his victim's head. The deputy sheriff slumped to his knees and tried to embrace Billy Byrne's legs as he pleaded for his life. "Cut it out, you poor boob," admonished Billy. "You've gotta die, and if you was half a man you'd want to die like one." The deputy sheriff slipped to the ground. His terror had overcome him, leaving him in happy unconsciousness. Byrne stood looking down upon the man for a moment. His wrist was chained to that of the other, and the pull of the deputy's body was irritating. Byrne stooped and placed the muzzle of the revolver back of the man's ear. "Justice," he muttered scornfully, and his finger tightened upon the trigger. Then, conjured from nothing, there rose between himself and the unconscious man beside him the figure of a beautiful girl. Her face was brave and smiling, and in her eyes was trust and pride. Whole worlds of them, trust and pride in Billy Byrne. Billy closed his eyes tight as though in physical pain. He brushed his hand quickly across his face. "Gawd," he muttered, "I can't do it, but I came awful close to it." Dropping the revolver into his side pocket, he kneeled beside the deputy sheriff and commenced to go through the man's clothes. After a moment he came upon what he sought, a key ring confining several keys. Billy found the one he wished, and presently he was free. He still stood looking at the deputy sheriff. "I ought to croak you," he murmured. "I'll never make my getaway if I don't. But she won't let me. God bless her." Suddenly a thought came to Billy Byrne. If he could have a start he might escape. It wouldn't hurt the man any to stay here for a few hours, or even for a day. Billy removed the deputy's coat and tore it into strips. With these he bound the man to a tree. Then he fastened a gag in his mouth. During the operation the deputy regained consciousness. He looked questioningly at Billy. "I decided not to croak you," explained the young man. "I'm just going to leave you here for a while. They'll be looking all along the right of way in a few hours. It won't be long before they find you. Now so long, and take care of yourself, Bo." And Billy Byrne had gone. A mistake that proved fortunate for Billy Byrne caused the penitentiary authorities to expect him and his guard by a later train, so no suspicion was aroused when they failed to come upon the train they really had started upon. This gave Billy a good 2-hour start that he would not have otherwise have had, an opportunity of which he made good use. Wherefore it was that by the time the authorities awoke to the fact that something had happened, Billy Byrne was 50 miles west of Joliet, bowling along aboard a fast Santa Fe freight. Shortly after night had fallen, the train crossed the Mississippi. Billy Byrne was hungry and thirsty, and as the train slowed down and came to a stop out in the midst of a dark solitude of silent, sweet-smelling country, Billy opened the door of his boxcar and dropped lightly to the ground. So far no one had seen Billy since he had passed from the ken of the trust deputy sheriff, and as Billy had no desire to be seen, he slipped over the edge of the embankment into a dry ditch, where he squatted upon his haunches waiting for the train to depart. The stop out there in the dark night was one of those mysterious stops which trains are prone to make, unexplained and doubtless unexplainable by any other than a higher intelligence which directs the movements of men and rolling stock. There was no town, and not even a switch light. Presently 2 staccato blasts broke from the engine's whistle. There was a progressive jerking at coupling pins, which started up the big locomotive and ran rapidly down the length of the train. There was the squeaking of brake shoes against wheels, and the train moved slowly forward again upon its long journey toward the coast, gaining momentum moment by moment, until finally the way car rolled rapidly past the hidden fugitive and the freight rumbled away to be swallowed up in the darkness. When it had gone, Billy rose and climbed back upon the track, along which he plodded in the wake of a departing train. Somewhere a road would presently cut across the track, and along the road there would be a farmhouse or a village where food and drink might be found. Billy was penniless, yet he had no doubt but that he should eat when he had discovered food. He was thinking of this as he walked briskly toward the west, and what he thought of induced a doubt in his mind as to whether it was, after all, going to be so easy to steal food. "Shaw," he exclaimed half aloud, "she wouldn't think it wrong for a guy to swipe a little grub when he was starving. It ain't like I was going to stick up a guy for his roll. Sure she wouldn't see nothing wrong for me to get something to eat. I ain't got no money. They took it all away from me and I got a right to live. But somehow I hate to do it. I wished there was some other way. Gee, but she made a sissy out of me. Funny how a feller can change. Why, I almost like being a sissy," and Billy grinned at the almost inconceivable idea. Before Billy came to a road he saw a light down in the little depression at one side of the track. It was not such a light as a lamp shining beyond a window makes. It rose and fell, winking and flaring close to the ground. It looked much like a campfire, and as Billy drew nearer he saw that such it was, and he heard a voice too. Billy approached more carefully. He must be careful always to see before being seen. The little fire burned upon the bank of a stream which the track bridged upon a concrete arch. Billy dropped once more from the right of way and climbed a fence into a thin wood. Through this he approached the campfire with small chance of being observed. As he neared it the voice resolved itself into articulate words, and presently Billy leaned against a tree close behind the speaker and listened. There was but a single figure beside the small fire. That of a man squatting upon his haunches, roasted something above the flames. At one edge of the fire was an empty tin can from which steam arose, and an aroma that was now and again wafted to Billy's nostrils. Coffee! My, how good it smelled! Billy's mouth watered, but the voice, that interested Billy almost as much as the preparations for the coming meal. "We'll dance a merry saraband from here to drowsy Samarcand. Along the sea, across the land, the birds are flying south. And you, my sweet Penelope, out there somewhere you wait for me, with buds of roses in your hair and kisses on your mouth." The words took hold of Billy somewhere and made him forget his hunger. Like a sweet incense which induces pleasant daydreams, they were wafted in upon him through the rich, mellow voice of a solitary camper, and the lilt of the meter entered his blood. But the voice, it was the voice of such as Billy Byrne always had loathed and ridiculed until he sat at the feet of Barbara Harding and learned many things, including love. It was the voice of culture and refinement. Billy strained his eyes through the darkness to have a closer look at the man. The light of the campfire fell upon frayed and bagging clothes, and upon the back of the head covered with a shapeless and disreputable soft hat. Obviously the man was a hobo. The coffee boiling in a discarded tin can would have been proof positive of this without other evidence. But there seemed plenty more. Yes, the man was a hobo. Billy continued to stand listening. "The mountains are all hidden mist, the valley is like amethyst. The poplar leaves they turn and twist, oh silver, silver green. Out there somewhere along the sea a ship is waiting patiently, while up the beach in bubbles slip, with white afloat between." Gee, thought Billy Byrne, but that's great stuff. I wonder where he gets it. It makes me want to hike until I find that place he's singing about. Billy's thoughts were interrupted by a sound in the wood to one side of him. As he turned his eyes in the direction of the slight noise which had attracted him, he saw two men step quietly out and cross toward the man at the campfire. These two were evidently hobos, doubtless pals of the poetic one. The latter did not hear them until they were directly behind him. Then he turned slowly and rose as they halted beside his fire. "Evening, Bo," said one of the newcomers. "Good evening, gentlemen," replied the camper. "Welcome to my humble home. Have you dined?" "No," replied the first speaker, "we ain't, but we're going to. Now can the chatter and duck. There ain't enough for one here, let alone three. Beat it," said the man, who was big and burly, assuming a menacing attitude, and took a truculent step nearer the solitary camper. The latter was short and slender. The larger man looked as though he might have eaten him in a single mouthful, but the camper did not flinch. "You pain me," he said. "You induce within me a severe and highly localized pain, and furthermore I don't like your whiskers." With which apparently irrelevant remark he seized the matted beard of the larger tramp and struck the fellow a quick, sharp blow in the face. Instantly the fellow's companion was upon him, but the camper retained his death grip upon the beard of the now yelling bully, and continued to rain blow after blow upon head and face. Billy Byrne was an interested spectator. He enjoyed a good fight as he enjoyed little else. But presently, when the first tramp succeeded in tangling his legs about the legs of his chastiser and dragging him to the ground, and the second tramp seized a heavy stick and ran forward to dash the man's brains out, Billy thought it time to interfere. Stepping forward, he called aloud as he came, "Cut it out, boes. You can't pull off any rough stuff like that with this here sweet singer. Can it? Can it?" And the second tramp raised his stick to strike the now prostrate camper. As he spoke, Billy Byrne broke into a run, and as the stick fell, he reached the man's side and swung a blow to the tramp's jaw that sent the fellow spinning backwards to the river's brim, where he tottered drunkenly for a moment and then plunged backwards into the shallow water. Then Billy seized the other attacker by the shoulder and dragged him to his feet. "You want some too, you big stiff?" he inquired. The man spluttered and tried to break away, striking at Billy as he did so, but a sudden punch, such a punch as Billy Byrne had once handed the surprised Harlem Hurricane, removed from the mind of the tramp the last vestige of any thought he might have harbored to do the newcomer bodily injury, and with it removed all else from the man's mind temporarily. As the fellow slumped unconscious to the ground, the camper rose to his feet. "Some wallop you have concealed in your sleeve, my friend," he said. "Place it there," and he extended a slender, shapely hand. Billy took it and shook it. "It don't get under the ribs like those verses of yours, though, Bo," he returned. "It seems to have insinuated itself beneath the guy's thick skull," replied the poetical one, "and it's a cinch my verses, nor any other, would ever get there." The tramp who had plumbed the depths of the creek's foot of water and 2 feet of soft mud was crawling ashore. "What do you want now?" inquired Billy Byrne. "A piece of soap?" "I'll get youse yet," spluttered the moist one through his watery whiskers. "Forget it," admonished Billy, "and hit the trail." He pointed toward the railroad right of way. "And you too, John L.," he added, turning to the other victim of his artistic execution, who was now sitting up. "Hike!" Mumbling and growling, the two unwashed shuffled away, and were presently lost to view along the vanishing track. The solitary camper had returned to his culinary effort, and unruffled and unconcerned, apparently, as though naught had occurred to disturb his peaceful solitude. "Sit down," he said after a moment, looking up at Billy, "and have a bite to eat with me. Take that leather easy chair. The Louis Quatorze is too small and spindle-legged for comfort." He waved his hand invitingly toward the sward beside the fire. For a moment he was entirely absorbed in the roasting fowl impaled upon a sharp stick which he held in his right hand. Then he presently broke into verse. "Around the world and back again, we saw it all. The mist and rain in England, and the hot old plain from Needles to Bordeaux. We kept a rambling all the time. I rustled grub, he rustled rhyme. Blind baggage, hoof it, ride or climb. We always put it through." "You're a good sort," he broke off suddenly. "There ain't many beaux that would have done as much for a fellow." "It was 2 against 1, replied Billy, "and I don't like them odds. Besides, I like your poetry. Where'd you get it? Make it up?" "Lord, no," laughed the other. "If I could do that I wouldn't be panhandling. A guy by the name of Henry Herbert Nibbs did them. Great, ain't they?" "They sure is. They get me right where I live." And then, after a pause, "Sure you got enough for 2, Bo?" "I have enough for you, old top," replied the host, "even if I only had half as much as I have. Here, take first crack at the ambrosia. Sorry, I have but a single cup, but James has broken the others. James is very careless. Sometimes I almost feel that I have to let him go." "Who's James?" asked Billy. "James? Oh, James is my man," replied the other. Billy looked up at his companion quizzically. Then he tasted the dark, thick concoction in the tin can. "This is coffee," he announced. "I thought you said it was ambrose." "I only wished to see if you would recognize it, my friend," replied the poetical one politely. "I am highly complimented that you can guess what it is from its taste." For several minutes the two ate in silence, passing the tin can back and forth, and slicing, hacking would be more nearly correct, pieces of meat from the half-roasted fowl. It was Billy who broke the silence. "I think," said he, "that you've been stringing me about James and Ambrose." The other laughed good-naturedly. "You are not offended, I hope," said he. "This is a sad old world, you know, and we're all looking for amusement. If a guy has no money to buy it with, he has to manufacture it." "Sure, I ain't sore," Billy assured him. "Say, spill that part again about Penelope with the kisses on her mouth, and you can kid me till the cows come home." The camper by the creek did as Billy asked him, while the latter sat with his eyes upon the fire, seeing in the sputtering little flames the oval face of her who was Penelope to him. When the verse was completed, he reached forth his hand and took the tin can in his strong fingers, raising it before his face. "Here's to his nibs," he said, and drank, passing the battered thing over to his new friend. "Yes," said the other, "here's to his nibs, and Penelope." "Drink hearty," returned Billy Byrne. The poetical one drew a sack of tobacco from his hip pocket and a rumpled package of papers from the pocket of his shirt, extending both towards Billy. "Want the makings?" he asked. "I ain't stuck on sponging," said Billy, "but maybe I can get even some day. And I sure do want to smoke. You see, I was frisked. I ain't got nothing. They didn't leave me a sou marquis." Billy reached across one end of the fire for the tobacco and cigarette papers. As he did so, the movement bared his wrist, and as the firelight fell upon it, the marks of the steel bracelet showed vividly. In the fall from the train, the metal had bitten into his flesh. His companion's eyes happened to fall upon the telltale mark. There was an almost imperceptible raising of the man's eyebrows, but he said nothing to indicate that he had noticed anything out of the ordinary. The two smoked on for many minutes without indulging in conversation. The camper quoted snatches from Service and Kipling. Then he came back to Nibs, who was evidently his favorite. Billy listened and thought. "Going anywheres in particular?" he asked during a momentary lull in the recitation. "Oh, south or west," replied the other. "Nowhere in particular. Any place suits me, just so it isn't north or east." "That's me," said Billy. "Let's travel double then," said the poetical one. "My name's Bridge." "And mine's Billy. Here, shake," and Byrne extended his hand. "Until one of us gets wearied of the other's company," said Bridge. "You're on," replied Billy. "Let's turn in." "Good!" exclaimed Bridge. "I wonder what's keeping James. He should have been here long since to turn down my bed and fix my bath." Billy grinned and rolled over on his side, his head uphill and his feet toward the fire. A couple of feet away Bridge paralleled him, and in 5 minutes both were breathing deeply in heavy slumber. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Return of the Mucker by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Joe DeNoia, Somerset, New Jersey. $500 reward. "We kept a-ramblin' all the time. I rustled grub, he rustled rhyme," quoted Billy Byrne, sitting up and stretching himself. His companion roused and came to one elbow. The sun was topping the scant wood behind them, glinting on the surface of the little creek. A robin hopped around the sward quite close to them, and from the branch of a tree 100 yards away came the sweet piping of a songbird. Farther off were the distant subdued noises of an awakening farm, the lowing of cows, the crowing of a rooster, the yelping of a happy dog just released from a night of captivity. Bridge yawned and stretched. Billy rose to his feet and shook himself. "This is the life," said Bridge. "Where you going?" "To rustle grub," replied Billy. "That's my part of the sketch." The other laughed. "Go to it," he said. "I hate it. That's the part that has come nearest making me turn respectable than any other. I hate to ask for a handout." Billy shrugged. He's done worse things than that in his life, and off he trudged, whistling. He felt happier than he had for many a day. He never had guessed that the country in the morning could be so beautiful. Behind him his companion collected the material for a fire, washed himself in the creek, and set the tin can, filled with water, at the edge of the kindling, and waited. There was nothing to cook, so it was useless to light a fire. As he sat there, thinking, his mind reverted to the red mark upon Billy's wrist, and he made a wry face. Billy approached the farmhouse from which the sounds of awakening still emanated. The farmer saw him coming, and ceased his activities upon the barnyard, leaned across the gate, and eyed him none too hospitably. "I want to get something to eat," explained Billy. "Got any money to pay for it with?" asked the farmer quickly. "No," said Billy, "but me partner and me are hungry, and we gotta eat." The farmer extended a gnarled forefinger and pointed toward the rear of the house. Billy looked in the direction thus indicated and espied a woodpile. He grinned good-naturedly. Without a word he crossed to the corded wood, picked up an axe which was stuck in the chopping block, and shedding his coat, went to work. The farmer resumed his chores. Half an hour later he stopped on his way in to breakfast and eyed the growing pile that lay beside Billy. "You don't have to chop all the wood in the county to get a meal from Jed Watson," he said. "I want to get enough from me partner, too," explained Billy. "Well, you've chopped enough for 2 meals, son," replied the farmer, and turning toward the kitchen door he called, "Here, Ma, fix this boy up with something to eat. Enough for a couple meals for 2 of 'em." As Billy walked away toward his camp, his arms laden with milk, butter, eggs, a loaf of bread, and some cold meat, he grinned rather contentedly. "A year or so ago," he mused, "I'd a stuck 'em up for this, and thought I was smart. Funny how a feller'll change, and all for a skirt that belongs to someone else now, too. Hell, what's the difference, anyhow? Should be glad if she knew, and it makes me feel better to act like she won. That old farmer guy now, who'd ever taken him for having a heart at all? When I seen him at first I thought he'd like to sick the dog on me, and there he comes along and tells Ma to pass me a handout like this. Gee, it's a funny world. She used to say that most everybody was decent if you went at 'em right, and I guess she knew. She knew most everything, anyway. Lord, I wish she'd been born on Grant Avenue, or I on Riverside Drive." As Billy walked up to his waiting companion, who had touched a match to the firewood as he sighted the numerous packages in the forager's arms, he was repeating, over and over, as though the words held him in thrall of fascination, "There ain't no sweet Penelope somewhere that's longing much for me." Bridge eyed the packages as Billy deposited them carefully and one at a time upon the grass beside the fire. The milk was in a clean, little, granite-ware pail, the eggs had been placed in a paper bag, while the other articles were wrapped in pieces of newspaper. As the opening of each revealed its contents, fresh, clean, and inviting, Bridge closed one eye and cocked his other up at Billy. "Did he die hard?" he inquired. "Did who die hard?" demanded the other. "Why, the dog, of course." "He ain't dead as I know of," replied Billy. "You don't mean to say, my friend, that they let you get away with all this without sicking the dog on you?" said Bridge. Billy laughed and explained, and the other was relieved. The red mark around Billy's wrist persisted in remaining uppermost in Bridge's mind. When they had eaten they had laid back upon the grass and smoked some more of Bridge's tobacco. "Well," inquired Bridge, "what's doing now?" "Let's be hiking," said Billy. Bridge rose and stretched. "My feet are tired and need a change. Come on, it's up to you," he quoted. Billy gathered together the food that they had not eaten, and made 2 equal-sized packages of it. He handed one to Bridge. "We'll divide the pack," he explained, "and here, drink the rest of the milk. I want the pail." "What are you gonna do with the pail?" asked Bridge. "Return it. Ma just loaned it to me." Bridge elevated his eyebrows a trifle. He had been mistaken after all. At the farmhouse the farmer's wife greeted them kindly, thanked Billy for returning her pail, which, if the truth were known, she had not expected to see again, and gave them each a handful of thick, light, golden brown cookies, the tops of which were encrusted with sugar. As they walked away Bridge sighed. "Nothing on earth like a good woman," he said. "Ma or Penelope?" asked Billy. "Either or both," replied Bridge. "I have no Penelope, but I did have a mighty fine ma." Billy made no reply. He was thinking of the slovenly, blear-eyed woman who had brought him into the world. The memory was far from pleasant. He tried to shake it off. "Bridge," he said, quite suddenly, and apropos of nothing, in an effort to change the subject. "That's an odd name. I've heard of Bridges and Bridger, but I've never heard of Bridge before." "Just a name a fellow gave me once up on the Yukon," explained Bridge. "I used to use a few words he'd never heard of, so he called me the Unabridged, which was too long. The fellow shortened it to Bridge, and it stuck. It has always stuck, and now I haven't any other. I even think of myself now as Bridge. Funny, ain't it?" "Yes," agreed Billy, and that was the end of it. He never thought of asking his companion's true name any more than Bridge would have questioned him on his, or of his past. The ethics of the roadside fire and the empty tomato tin did not countenance such impertinences. For several days the two continued their leisurely way toward Kansas City. Once they rode a few miles on a freight train, but for the most part they were content to plod joyously along the dusty highways. Billy continued to rustle grub, while Bridge relieved the monotony by an occasional burst of poetry. "You know so much of that stuff," said Billy as they were smoking by their campfire one evening, "that I think you'd be able to make some up yourself." "I've tried," admitted Bridge, "but there always seems to be something lacking in my stuff. It don't get under the belt. The divine afflatus is not there. I may start out all right, but I always end up where I didn't expect to go and where nobody wants to be." "'Member any of it?" asked Billy. "There was one I wrote about a lake where I camped once," said Bridge reminiscently, "but I can only recall one stanza." "Let's have it," urged Billy. "I bet it has nibs hanging to the ropes." Bridge cleared his throat and recited: "Silver are the ripples, solemn are the dunes, happy are the fishes, for they are full of prunes." He looked up at Billy, a smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. "How's that?" he asked. Billy scratched his head. "It's all right but the last line," said Billy candidly. "There's something wrong with the last line." "Yes," agreed Bridge, "there is." "I guess Nibs is safe for another round at least," said Billy. Bridge was eyeing his companion, noting the broad shoulders, the deep chest, the mighty forearm and biceps which the other's light cotton shirt could not conceal. "It is none of my business," he said presently, "but from your general appearance, from bits of idiom you occasionally drop, and from the way you handled those 2 bows the night we met, I should rather surmise that at some time or other you have been less than 1,000 miles from a W.K. roped arena." "I seen a prize fight once," admitted Billy. It was the day before they were due to arrive in Kansas City that Billy earned a handout from a restaurant keeper in a small town by doing some odd jobs for the man. The food he gave Billy was wrapped in an old copy of the Kansas City Star. When Billy reached camp he tossed the package to Bridge, who, in addition to his honorable post as poet laureate, was also cook. Then Billy walked down to the stream nearby that he might wash away the grime and sweat of honest toil from his hands and face. As Bridge unwrapped the package and the paper unfolded beneath his eyes an article caught his attention. Just casually at first, but presently to the exclusion of all else. As he read, his eyebrows alternated between a position of considerable elevation to that of a deep frown. Occasionally he nodded knowingly. Finally he glanced up at Billy, who was just rising from his ablutions. Hastily Bridge tore from the paper the article that attracted his interest, folded it, and stuffed it into one of his pockets. He had not had time to finish the reading, and he wanted to save the article for a later opportunity for careful perusal. That evening Bridge sat for a long time scrutinizing Billy through half-closed lids, and often he found his eyes wandering to the red ring about the other's wrist, but whatever may have been within his thoughts, he kept to himself. It was noon when the two sauntered into Kansas City. Billy had $1 in his pocket, a whole dollar. He had earned it assisting an automobilist out of a ditch. "We'll have a swell feed," he had confided to Bridge, "and sleep in the bed just to learn how much nicer it is sleeping out under the black sky and the shiny little stars." "You're a profligate, Billy," said Bridge. "I don't know what that means," said Billy, "but if it's something I shouldn't be, I probably am." The two went to a rooming house of which Bridge knew, where they can get a clean room with a double bed for 50 cents. It was rather a high price to pay, of course, but Bridge was more or less fastidious, and he admitted to Billy that he'd rather sleep in the clean dirt of a roadside than in the breed of dirt one finds in an unclean bed. At the end of the hall was a washroom, and toward this Bridge made his way, after removing his coat and throwing it across the foot of the bed. After he had left the room Billy chanced to notice a folded bit of newspaper on the floor beneath Bridge's coat. He picked it up to lay it on the table which answered the purpose of a dresser when a single word caught his attention. It was the name Schneider. Billy unfolded the clipping, and as his eyes took in the heading a strange expression entered them, a hard, cold gleam such as had not touched them since the day he had abandoned the deputy sheriff in the woods midway between Chicago and Joliet. This is what Billy read: Billy Byrne, sentenced to life imprisonment in Joliet Penitentiary for the murder of Schneider, the old West Side saloon keeper, hurled himself from the train that was bearing him to Joliet yesterday, dragging with him the deputy sheriff to whom he was handcuffed. The deputy was found a few hours later, bound and gagged, lying in the woods along the Santa Fe, not far from Lamont. He was uninjured. He said that Byrne got a good start and doubtless took advantage of it to return to Chicago, where a man of his stamp could find more numerous and safer retreats than elsewhere. There was much more, a detailed account of the crime for the commission of which Billy had been sentenced, a full and complete description of Billy, a record of his long years of transgression, and, at last, the mention of a $500 reward that the authorities had offered for information that would lead to his arrest. When Billy had concluded the reading, he refolded the paper and placed it in a pocket of a coat hanging upon the foot of the bed. A moment later Bridge entered the room. Billy caught himself looking often at his companion, and always there came to his mind the termination of the article he had found in Bridge's pocket, the mention of the $500 reward. $500, thought Billy, is a lot of coin. I just wonder now, and he let his eyes wander to his companion as though he might read upon his face the purpose which lay in the man's heart. He don't look it, but $500 is a lot of coin for a beau. And what in hell did he have that article hid on his clothes for? That's what I'd like to know. I guess it's up to me to blow. All the recently acquired content which had been Billy's since he had come upon the poetic Bridge, and the two had made their carefree, leisurely way along shaded country roadsides, or paused beside cool brooklets that meandered lazily through sweet-smelling meadows, was dissipated in the instant that he had realized the nature of the article his companion had been carrying and hiding from him. For days no thought of pursuit or capture had arisen to perplex him. He had seemed such a tiny thing out there amidst the vastness of rolling hills, of woods, and plain that there had been induced within him an unconscious assurance that no one could find him even though they might seek for him. The idea of meeting a plain-clothes man from detective headquarters around the next bend of a peaceful Missouri road was so preposterous and incongruous that Billy had found it impossible to give the matter serious thought. He never before had been in the country districts of this native land. To him the United States was all like Chicago, or New York, or Milwaukee, the three cities with which he was most familiar. His experience of unurban localities had been gained amidst the primeval jungles of faraway Yoka. There had been no detective sergeants there. Unquestionably there could be none here. Detective sergeants were indigenous to the soil that grew corner saloons and pool rooms, and to none others. As well expected to discover one of Oda Yorimoto's samurai hiding behind a fire plug on Michigan Boulevard, as to look for one of those along a farm-bordered road. But here in Kansas City, amidst the noises and odors that meant a large city, it was different. Here the next man he met might be looking for him, or if not, then the very first policeman they encountered could arrest him upon a word from Bridge, and Bridge would get $500. Just then Bridge burst forth into poetry. In a flannel shirt from earth's clean dirt, here, pal, is my calloused hand. Oh, I love each day as a rover may, nor seek to understand. To enjoy is good enough for me. The gypsy of a god I am. But here's a hail to... Say, he interrupted himself, what's the matter with going out now and wrapping ourselves around that swell feed you were speaking of? Billy rose. It didn't seem possible that Bridge could be doing the double cross to him. In a flannel shirt from earth's clean dirt, here, pal, is my calloused hand. Billy repeated the lines half aloud. They renewed his confidence in Bridge somehow. Like them? Asked the latter. Yes, said Billy. S'more of nibs? No.
Service. Come on, let's go and dine. How about the Midland? And he grinned at his little joke, and he led the way toward the street. It was late afternoon. The sun had already set, but it was still too light for lamps. Bridge led the way toward a certain eating place of which he knew where a man might dine well and from a clean platter for 2 bits. Billy had been keeping his eyes open for detectives. They had passed no uniformed police. That would be the crucial test, thought he, unless Bridge intended tipping off headquarters on the quiet and having the pinch made at night after Billy had gone to bed. As they reached the little restaurant, which was in the basement, Bridge motioned Billy down ahead of him. Just for an instant he, himself, paused at the head of the stairs and looked about. As he did so, a man stepped from the shadow of a doorway upon the opposite side of the street. If Bridge saw him, he apparently gave no sign, for he turned slowly and with deliberate steps followed Billy into the eating place. End of chapter 3.
Chapter 4 of Return of the Mucker by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Joe Denoya, Somerset, New Jersey. On the trail. As they entered the place, Billy, who was ahead, sought a table, but as he was about to hang up his cap and seat himself, Bridge touched his elbow. "Let's go to the washroom and clean up a bit," he said in a voice that might be heard by those nearest. "Why, we just washed before we left our room," expostulated Billy. "Shut up and follow me," Bridge whispered into his ear. Immediately Billy was all suspicion. His hand flew to the pocket in which the gun of the deputy sheriff still rested. They would never take him alive, of that Billy was positive. He wouldn't go back to life imprisonment, not after he had tasted the sweet freedom of wide spaces, such a freedom as the trammeled city cannot offer. Bridge saw the movement. "Cut it," he whispered, "and follow me, as I tell you. I just saw a Chicago dick across the street. He might not have seen you, but it looked almighty like it. He'll be down here in about 2 seconds. Come on, we'll beat it through the rear. I know the way." Billy Byrne heaved a great sigh of relief. Suddenly he was almost reconciled to the thought of capture, for in the instant he had realized that it had not been so much his freedom that he had dreaded to lose as his faith in the companion in whom he had believed. Without sign of haste the two walked the length of the room and disappeared through the doorway leading into the washroom. Before them was a window opening upon a squalid backyard. The building stood upon a hillside, so that while the entrance to the eating place was below the level of the street in front, its rear was flush with the ground. Bridge motioned Billy to climb through the window while he shot the bolt upon the inside of the door leading back into the restaurant. A moment later he followed the fugitive, and then took the lead. Down narrow, dirty alleys and through litter-piled backyards he made his way, while Billy followed at his heels. Dusk was gathering, and before they had gone far, darkness came. They neither paused nor spoke until they had left the business portion of the city behind and were well out of the zone of bright lights. Bridge was the first to break the silence. "I suppose you wonder how I knew," he said. "No," replied Billy. "I seen that clipping you got in your pocket. It fell out of the floor when you took your coat off in the room this afternoon to go and wash." "Oh," said Bridge, "I see. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of it. We won't mention it again, old man. I don't need to tell you that I'm for you." "No, not after tonight," Billy assured him. They went on again for some time without speaking. Then Billy said, "I got 2 things to tell you. The first is that after I seen that newspaper article in your clothes, I thought you was figuring on double-crossing me and claiming the 500. I ought to have known better. The other is that I didn't kill Schneider. I wasn't near his place that night, and that's straight." "I'm glad you told me both," said Bridge. "I think we'll understand each other better after this. We're each running away from something. We'll run together, eh?" And he extended his hand. "In flannel shirt from earth's clean dirt. Here, pal, is my calloused hand," he quoted, laughing. Billy took the other's hand. He noticed that Bridge hadn't said what he was running away from. Billy wondered, but asked no questions. South they went after they had left the city behind, out into the sweet and silent darkness of the country. During the night they crossed the line into Kansas, and morning found them in a beautiful, hilly country to which all thoughts of cities, crime, and police seemed so utterly foreign that Billy could scarce believe that only a few hours before a Chicago detective had been less than 100 feet from him. The new sun burst upon them as they topped the grassy hill. The dew-bespangled blades scintillated beneath the gorgeous rays, which would presently sweep them again into the nothingness from which they had sprung. Bridge halted and stretched himself. He threw his head back and let the warm sun beat down upon his bronzed face. "There's sunshine in the heart of me. My blood sings in the breeze. The mountains are all a part of me. I'm fellow to the trees. My golden youth I'm squandering. Sun libertine am I. A-wandering, until the day I die." And then he stood for minutes, drinking in deep breaths of pure, sweet air of the new day. Beside him,
A head taller, savagely strong, stood Billy Byrne, his broad shoulders squared, his great chest expanding as he inhaled. "It's great, ain't it?" he said, at last. "I never knew the country was like this, and I don't know that I ever would have known if it hadn't been for those poet guys you're always spouting. I always had an idea they was sissy fellows," he went on, "but a guy can't be a sissy and think the thoughts they must have thought to write stuff that sends the blood chasing through a feller like he'd had a drink on an empty stomach. I used to think everyone was a sissy who wasn't a tough guy. I was a tough guy all right, and I was mighty proud of it. I ain't any more, and haven't been for a long time, but before I took a tumble to myself, I'd have hated you, Bridge. I'd have hated your fine talk, and your poetry, and the thing about you that makes you hate to touch a guy for a handout. I'd have hated myself if I'd thought that I could ever talk mushy like I am now. Gee, Bridge, but I was the limit. A girl, a nice girl, called me a mucker once, and a coward. I was both, but I had the reputation of being the toughest guy on the west side, and I thought I was a man. I nearly poked her face for it. Think of it, Bridge, I nearly did, but something stopped me. Something held my hand from it, and lately I have liked to think that maybe what stopped me was something in me that had always been there. Something decent that was really a part of me. I hate to think that I was such a beast at heart as I acted like all my life up to that minute. I began to change then. It was mighty slow, and I'm still a roughneck, but I'm getting on. She helped me most, of course, and now you're helping me a lot too. You and your poetry stuff. If some dick don't get me, I may be a human being before I die." Bridge laughed. "It is odd," he said, "how our viewpoints change with changed environment and the passing of the years. Time was, Billy, when I'd have hated you as much as you would have hated me. I don't know that I should have said hate, for that is not exactly the word. It was more contempt that I feel for men whom I consider as not belonging upon that intellectual or social plane to which I considered I was born. I thought of people who moved outside my limited sphere as the great unwashed. I pitied them, and I honestly believe now that in the bottom of my heart I considered them of a different clay than I, and with souls, if they possessed such things, about on par with the souls of sheep and cows. I couldn't have seen the man in you, Billy, then, any more than you could have seen the man in me. I have learned much since then. Although I still stick to a part of my original articles of faith, I do believe that all men are not equal, and I know that there are a great many more with whom I would not pal than there are those with whom I would. Because one man speaks better English than another, or has read more and remembers it, only makes him a better man in that particular respect. I think none the less of you because you can't quote Browning or Shakespeare. The thing that counts is that you can appreciate, as I do, Service and Kipling and Nibs. Now maybe we're both wrong. Maybe Nibs and Kipling and Service didn't write poetry, and some people will say as much. But whatever it is, it gets you and me in the same way, and so in this respect, we are equals. Which being the case, let's see if we can't rustle some grub, and then find the nice soft spot whereupon to pound our respective ears. Billy, deciding that he was too sleepy to work for food, invested half of the capital that was to have furnished the swell feed the night before in what 2 bits would purchase from a generous housewife on a nearby farm, and then, stretching themselves beneath the shade of a tree sufficiently far from the road that they might not attract unnecessary observation, they slept until noon. But their precaution failed to serve their purpose entirely. A little before noon, 2 filthy, bearded knights of the road clambered laboriously over the fence and headed directly for the very tree under which Billy and Bridge lay sleeping. In the minds of the two was the same thought that had induced Billy Byrne and the poetic Bridge to seek the same secluded spot. There was, in the stiff shuffle of the men, something rather familiar. We have seen them before, just for a few minutes it is true, but under circumstances that impressed some of their characteristics upon us. The very last we saw of them they were shuffling away in the darkness along a railroad track, after promising that eventually they would wreak dire vengeance upon Billy, who had just trounced them. Now as they came unexpectedly upon the 2 sleepers, they did not immediately recognize in them the objects of their recent hate. They just stood looking stupidly down on them, wondering in what way they might turn their discovery to their own advantage. Nothing in the raiment either of Billy or Bridge indicated that here was any particularly rich field for loot, and, too, the athletic figure of Byrne would rather have discouraged any attempt to roll him without first handing him the KO, as the 2 would have naively put it. But as they gazed down upon the features of the sleepers, the eyes of one of the tramps narrowed to 2 ugly slits, while those of his companion went wide in incredulity and surprise. "Do youse know dem guys?" asked the first, and without waiting for a reply, he went on, "Dem's the guys that beat us up back there, the other side of KC. Do youse get 'em?" "Sure?" asked the other. "Sure, I'd know dem in 1,000. Let's hand 'em a couple and beat it," and he stooped to pick up a large stone that lay near at hand. "Cut it," whispered the second tramp. "Youse don't know dem guys at all. They may be the guys that beats us up, but that big stiff there is more than that." He's wanted and shy, and there's half a thou on him." "Who put youse, Jerry, to all dat?" inquired the first tramp, skeptically. "I was in de still with him. He croaked some guy. He's a lifer. On the way to the pen he pushes his dick off in the rattler and makes his getaway. Dat Peter boy we meets at Quincy slips me an earful about him. Here's where we draws down to 500 if we're cagey." "What do you mean cagey?" "Why, we leaves him alone and goes to the next farm and calls up KC and tips off the dicks, see? Youse don't think we'll get any of that 500, do youse, with dicks on it?" The other scratched his head. "No," he said, rather dubiously, after a moment's deep thought. "They don't nobody get nothin' that the dicks see first. But we'll get even with these blokes, anyway." "Maybe dey's pass up a couple bucks," said the other hopefully. "Dey's oughta do that much." Detective Sergeant Flanagan of Headquarters, Chicago, slouched in a chair in the private office of the Chief of Detectives of Kansas City, Missouri. Sergeant Flanagan was sore. He would have said as much himself. He had been sent west to identify a suspect whom the Kansas City authorities had arrested, but he had been unable to do so, and had been preparing to return to his home city when the brilliant aureola of an unusual piece of excellent fortune had shone upon him for a moment, and then faded away through the grimy entrance of the basement eating place. He had been walking along the street the previous evening thinking of nothing in particular, but with eyes and ears alert as becomes a successful police officer, when he had espied two men approaching upon the opposite sidewalk. There was something familiar in the swing of the giant frame of one of the men. So true to the years of training, Sergeant Flanagan melted into the shadows of a store entrance and waited until the two should have come closer. They were directly opposite him when the truth flashed upon him. The big fellow was Billy Byrne, and there was a $500 reward out for him. Then the two turned and disappeared down the stairwell that led to the underground restaurant. Sergeant Flanagan saw Byrne's companion turn and look back, just as Flanagan stepped from the doorway to cross the street after them. That was the last Sergeant Flanagan had seen either of Billy Byrne or his companion. The trail had ceased at the open window of the washroom at the rear of the restaurant, and search as he would, he had been unable to pick it up again. No one in Kansas City had seen two men that night answering the descriptions Flanagan had been able to give, at least no one whom Flanagan could unearth. Finally, he had been forced to take the Kansas City chief into his confidence, and already a dozen men were scouring such sections of Kansas City in which it seemed most likely an escaped murderer would choose to hide. Flanagan had been out himself for a while, but now he was to learn what progress, if any, had been made. He had just learned that 3 suspects had been arrested and was waiting to have them paraded before him. When the door swung in and the 3 were escorted into his presence, Sergeant Flanagan gave a snort of disgust, indicative probably not only of despair, but in a manner registering his private opinion of the mental horsepower and efficiency of the Kansas City sleuths. For of the 3, one was a pasty-faced, chestless youth, even then under the influence of cocaine, another was an old bewhiskered hobo, while the third was unquestionably a Chinaman. Even professional courtesy could scarce restrain Sergeant Flanagan's desire toward bitter sarcasm, and he was upon the point of launching forth into a vitriolic arraignment of everything west of Chicago, up to and including, specifically, the Kansas City Detective Bureau, when the telephone bell at the chief's desk interrupted him. He had wanted the chief to hear just what he thought, so he waited. The chief listened for a few minutes, asked several questions, and then, placing a fat hand over the transmitter, he wheeled about towards Flanagan. "Well," he said, "I guess I got something for you at last. There's a bow in the wire that says he's seen your man now near Shawnee. He wants to know if you'll split the reward with him." Flanagan yawned and stretched. "I suppose," he said ironically, "that if I go down there I'll find he's corralled a nigger," and he looked sorrowfully at the 3 specimens before him. "I dunno," said the chief. "This guy says he knows Byrne well, and that he's got it in for him. Shall I tell him you'll be down and split the reward?" "Tell him I'll be down, and I'll treat him right," replied Flanagan, and after the chief had transmitted the message and hung up the receiver. "Where is this here Shawnee anyway? I'll send a couple of men along with you. It isn't far across the line, and there won't be no trouble in getting back without nobody knowing anything about it, if you get him." "All right," said Flanagan, his visions of 500 already dwindled to a possible 1. It was a little past 1 o'clock that a touring car rolled south out of Kansas City with Detective Sergeant Flanagan in the front seat with the driver and 2 burly representatives of Missouri law in the back. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Return of the Mucker by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Joe Denoya, Somerset, New Jersey. One turn deserves another. When the 2 tramps approached the farmhouse at which Billy had purchased food a few hours before, the farmer's wife called a dog that was asleep in the summer kitchen and took a shotgun down from its hook beside the door. From long expertise the lady was a reader of character, of hobo character at least, and she saw nothing in the appearance of either of these 2 that inspired even a modicum of confidence. Now the young fellow who had been there earlier in the day, and who, wonder of wonders, had actually paid for the food that she gave him, had been of a different stamp. His clothing had proclaimed him a tramp, but, thanks to the razor Bridge had always carried, he was cleanly shaven. His year of total abstinence had given him clear eyes and a healthy skin. There was a freshness and vigor in his appearance and carriage that inspired confidence rather than suspicion. She had not mistrusted him, but these others she did mistrust. When they asked to use the telephone she refused and ordered them away, thinking it but an excuse to enter the house. But they argued the matter, explaining that they had discovered an escaped murderer hiding nearby, in fact in her own meadow, and that they wished only to call up the Kansas City police. Finally she yielded, but kept the dog by her side and the shotgun in her hand while the two entered the room and crossed to the telephone upon the opposite side. From the conversation which she overheard, the woman concluded that, after all, she had been mistaken, not only about these two, but about the young man who had come earlier in the day and purchased food from her, for the description the tramp gave of the fugitive tallied exactly with that of the young man. It seemed incredible that so honest-looking a man could be a murderer. The good woman was shocked, and not a little unstrung by the thought that she had been in the house alone when he had come, and if he had wished to, he could have easily have murdered her. "I hope they get him," she said, when the tramp had concluded his talk with Kansas City. "It's awful the carryings on they is nowadays. Why, a body can't never tell who to trust, and I thought him such a nice young man, and he paid me for what he got, too." The dog, bored by the inaction, had wandered back into the summer kitchen and resumed his broken slumber. One of the tramps was leaning against the wall talking with the farmer woman. The other was busily engaged in scratching his right shin with what remained of the heel of his left shoe. He supported himself with one hand on the small table, upon the top of which was a family Bible. Quite unexpectedly he lost his balance. The table tipped, and he was thrown still further over toward it, and all in the flash of an eye, tramp, table, and family Bible crashed to the floor. With a little cry of alarm the woman rushed forward to gather up the holy book, in her haste forgetting the shotgun and leaving it behind her leaning against the arm of a chair. Almost simultaneously the two tramps saw the real cause of her perturbation. The large book had fallen upon its back, open, and as several of the leaves turned over before coming to rest their eyes went wild at what was revealed between. United States currency in denominations of $5, $10, and $20 bills lay snugly inserted between the leaves of the Bible. The tramp who lay on the floor, as yet too surprised to attempt to rise, rolled over and seized the book as a football player seizes the pigskin after a fumble, covering it with his body, his arms, and sticking out his elbows as a further protection to the invaluable thing. At the first cry of the woman the dog rose, growling, and bounded into the room. The tramp leaning against the wall saw the brute coming, a mongrel hound dog, bristling and savage. The shotgun stood almost within the man's reach. A step and it was in his hands. As though sensing the fellow's intentions, the dog wheeled from the tramp upon the floor, toward whom he had leaped, and sprang for the other ragged scoundrel. The muzzle of the gun met him halfway. There was a deafening roar. The dog collapsed on the floor, his chest torn out. Now the woman began to scream for help, but in an instant both tramps were upon her, choking her to silence. One of them ran to the summer kitchen, returning a moment later with a piece of clothesline, while the other sat astride the victim. His fingers closed about her throat. Once he released his hold, she screamed again. Presently she was secured and gagged. Then the two commenced to rifle the Bible. $1,100 in bills were hidden there, because the woman and her husband didn't believe in banks. The savings of a lifetime. In agony, as she regained consciousness, she saw the last of their little hoard transferred to the pockets of the tramps, and when they had finished, they demanded to know where she kept the rest, loosening her gag that she might reply. She told them that was all the money she had in the world, and begged them not to take it. "Youse have got more coin than dis," growled one of the men, "and youse had better pass it over, or we'll find a way to make youse." But still she insisted that was all. The tramp stepped into the kitchen. A wood fire was burning in the stove. A pair of pliers lay upon the windowsill. With these he lifted one of the hot stove-hole covers and returned to the parlor, grinning. "I guess she'll remember she's got more when dis begins to work," he said. "Take off her shoes, Dink." The other growled an objection. "You poor boob," he said. "Dix'll be here in a little while. We'd better be making our getaway with what we got." "Gee!" exclaimed the companion. "I clean forgot all about the Dix," and then after a moment's silence during which his evil face underwent various changes of expression from fear to final relief, he turned an ugly crooked grimace upon his companion. "We got a croaker," he said. "They ain't no other way. If they finds her alive she'll blab sure, and they won't be no trouble about getting us or identifying us neither." The other shrugged. "Let's beat it," he whined. "We can't more'n do time for dis job if we stop now, but the other'll mean," and he made a suggestive circle with a grimy finger close to his neck. "Nah, it won't nothing of the kind," urged his companion. "I got it all doped out. We got lots of time before the Dicks are due. We'll croak the skirt, and then we'll beat up to the road, and meet dem Dicks, see?" The other was aghast.
"When did youse goes nuts?" he asked. "I ain't got nuts. Wait till I get through. We meet the Dicks, innocent like, but first we catches the doe in the woods. We tells 'em we hurried right on to lead 'em to this Byrne guy, and den when we gets back here to the farmhouse and finds what's happened here, we'll be as flabbergasted as they be." "Oh, nuts!" exclaimed the other disgustedly. "Youse don't think youse can put dat over on any wise guy from Chi, do youse? Who would they think croaked the old woman and the Ki? Would they think they killed themselves?" "They'll think Byrne and his partner croaked 'em, you simp," replied Crumb. Dink scratched his head as the possibilities of the scheme filled into his dull brain. A broad grin bared his yellow teeth. "You're dere, pal," he exclaimed, real admiration in his voice. "But who's goin' to do it?" "I'll do it," said Crumb. "There ain't no chance of gettin' in bad for it, so I'd just as soon do the job. Get me a knife or an axe from the kitchen. The gat makes too much noise." Something awoke Billy Byrne with a start. Faintly, in the back of his consciousness, the dim suggestion of a loud noise still reverberated. He sat up and looked about him. "I wonder what that was," he mused. "It sounded like the report of a gun." Bridge awoke about the same time and turned lazily over, raising himself upon an elbow. He grinned at Billy. "Good morning," he said, and then, "Says I, then let's be on the float. You certainly have got my goat. You make me hungry in my throat for seeing things that's new. Out there someone will ride the range at looking for the new and strange. My feet are tired and need a change. Come on, it's up to you." "Come on then," agreed Billy, coming to his feet. As he rose there came, faintly but distinct, the unmistakable scream of a frightened woman. From the direction of the farmhouse it came, from the farmhouse at which Billy had purchased their breakfast. Without waiting for a repetition of the cry, Billy wheeled and broke into a rapid run in the direction of the little cluster of buildings. Bridge leapt to his feet and followed behind him, dropping behind though, for he had not had the road work that Billy had recently been training through in his training for the battle in which he had defeated the White Hope that time in New York when Professor Cassidy had wagered his entire pile upon him, nor in vain. Dink searched about the summer kitchen for an axe or hatchet, but failing to find either, rummaged through a table drawer until he came upon a large carving knife. This would do the job nicely. He thumbed the edge as he carried it back into the parlor to Crumb. The poor woman, lying upon the floor, was quite conscious. Her eyes were wide and rolling in horror. She struggled with her bonds and tried to force the gag from her mouth with her tongue, but her every effort was useless. She had heard every word that had passed between the two men. She knew that they would carry out the plan that they had formulated, that there was no chance that they would be interrupted in their gruesome work, for her husband had driven over to a farm beyond Holiday, leaving before sunrise, and there was little prospect that he would return before milking time in the evening. The detectives from Kansas City could not possibly reach the farm until far too late to save her. She saw Dink return from the summer kitchen with a long knife. She recalled the day that she had bought that knife in town, and the various uses to which she had put it. That very morning she had sliced some bacon with it. How distinctly such things recurred to her at that frightful moment. And now the hideous creature standing beside her was going to use it to cut her throat. She saw Crumb had taken the knife and feel of the blade, running his thumb along it. She saw him stoop, his eyes turned upon hers. He grasped her chin and forced it upwards and back, better to expose her throat. Oh, why could she not faint? Why must she suffer all those hideous preliminaries? Why could she not even close her eyes? Crumb raised the knife and held the blade close above her bared neck. A shudder ran through her, and then the door crashed open and a man sprang into the room. It was Billy Byrne. Through the window he had seen what had passed in the interior. His hand fell upon Crumb's collar and jerked him backward from his prey. Dink seized the shotgun and turned it upon the intruder, but he was too close. Billy grasped the barrel of the weapon and threw the muzzle up toward the ceiling as the tramp pulled the trigger. Then he wrenched it from the man's hand, swung it once above his head, and crashed the stock down upon Dink's skull. Dink went down and out for the count. For several counts, in fact. Crumb stumbled to his feet and made a break for the door. In the doorway he ran full into Bridge, winded but ready. The latter, realizing that the matted one was attempting to escape, seized a handful of his tangled beard, and, as he had done upon another occasion, held the tramp's head in rigid position while he planted a series of blows in the fellow's face. Blows that left Crumb as completely out of battle as his mildewed comrade. "Watch him," says Billy, handing Bridge the shotgun. Then he turned his attention to the woman. With the carving knife that was to have ended her life, he cut her bonds. Removing the gag from her mouth, he lifted her in his strong arms and carried her to the little horsehair sofa that stood in one corner of the parlor, laying her upon it very gently. He was thinking of Ma Watson. This woman resembled her just a little, particularly in her comfortable, motherly expansiveness, and she had had a kind word of a cheery goodbye for him that morning as he departed. The woman lay upon the sofa, breathing hard and moaning just a little. The shock had been almost too much even for her stolid nerves. Presently she turned her eyes towards Billy. "You're a good boy," she said, "and you come just in the nick of time. They got all my money. It's in their clothes." And then a look of terror overspread her face. For the moment she had forgotten that she had heard about this man, that he was an escaped convict, a convicted murderer.
Was she any better off now that she had let him know about the money than she was with the others after they discovered it? At her words, Bridge kneeled and searched the two tramps. He counted the bills as he removed them from their pockets. 1,100, he asked, and handed the money to Billy. 1,100, yes, breathed the woman, faintly, her eyes horror-filled and fearful as she gazed upon Billy's face. She didn't care for the money any more. They could have it all if they would only let her live. Billy turned toward her and held the rumpled green mass out. Here, he said, but that's an awful lot of coin for a woman to have around the house, and her all alone. You ought not have done it. She took the money in trembling fingers. It seemed incredible that a man was returning it to her. But I knew it, she said finally. Knew what? I knew you was a good boy. They said you was a murderer. Billy's brows contracted, and an expression of pain crossed his face. How did they come to that? He asked. I heard them telephone to Kansas City to the police, she replied, and then she sat bolt upright. The detectives are on their way here now, she almost screamed, and even if you are a murderer, I don't care. I won't stand by and see them get you after what you've done for me. I don't believe you're a murderer anyhow. You're a good boy. My boy would be about as old and as big as you are now, if he lives. He ran away a long time ago. Maybe you've met him. His name's Eddie. Eddie Shorter. I ain't heard from him for years. No, she went on. I don't believe what they said. You got too good a face. But if you are a murderer, you get out now before they come, and I'll send them on a wild goose chase in the wrong direction. But these, said Billy, we can't leave these here. Tie 'em up and give me the shotgun, she said. I'll bet they don't come any more funny business on me. She had regained both her composure and her nerve by this time. Together, Billy and Bridge trussed up the two tramps. An elephant couldn't have forced the bonds they placed upon them. Then they carried them down cellar, and when they had come up again, Mrs. Shorter barred the cellar door. I reckon they won't get out of there very fast, she said, and now you two boys run along. Got any money? And without waiting for a reply, she counted $25 from the roll she had tucked in the front of her waist and handed them to Billy. Nothing doing, said he, but thanks just the same. You gotta take it, she insisted. Let me make believe I'm giving it to my boy, Eddie. Please. And the tears that came to her eyes proved far more effective than her generous words. Oh, all right, said Billy. I'll take it and pass it along to Eddie if I ever meet him, Now please, hurry, she urged. I don't want you to be caught. Even if you are a murderer. I wish you weren't, though. I'm not, said Billy. But the law says I am. What the law says, goes. He turned toward the doorway with Bridge, calling a goodbye to the woman. But as he stepped out upon the veranda, the dust of a fast-moving automobile appeared about a bend in the road a half-mile from the house. Too late, he said, turning to Bridge. Here they come. The woman brushed by them and peered up the road. Yes, she said, it must be them. Lordy, what'll we do? I'll duck out the back way, that's what I'll do, said Billy. It wouldn't do for a mighty good, said Mrs. Shorter, with a shake of her head. They'll telephone every farmer within 20 miles of here in every direction, and they'll get you sure. Wait, I got a scheme. Come with me. And she turned and busted through the little parlor, out of a doorway into something that was a half-hall, half-storeroom. There was a flight of stairs leading to the upper story, and she waddled up them as fast as her legs could carry her, motioning the two men to follow her. In a rear room was a trap door to the ceiling. Drag that commode under this, she told them, then climb into the attic and close the trap door. They won't never find you there. Billy pulled the ancient article of furniture beneath the opening, and in another moment the two men were in the stuffy atmosphere of the unventilated loft. Beneath them they heard Mrs. Shorter dragging the commode back to its accustomed place, and then the sound of her footsteps descending the stair. Presently there came to them the rattling of a motor without, followed by the voice of men in the house. For an hour, half asphyxiated by the closeness of the attic, they waited, and then again they heard the sound of the running engine, diminishing as the machine drew away. Shortly after, Mrs. Shorter's voice rose to them from below. You can come down now, she said. They've gone. When they had descended, she led them to the kitchen. I got a bite to eat ready for you while they was here, she explained. When you've done, you can hide in the barn till dark, and after that I'll have my old man take you across to Dotson. That's a junction, and you ought to be able to get away easy enough from there. I told them you started for Olathe. That's where they've gone with the two tramps. My, but I did have a time of it. I ain't much good at storytelling, but I reckon I told more stories this afternoon than I ever told before in my life. I told them there was the two of you, and that the biggest one had red hair, and the little one was pockmarked. Then they said you probably wasn't the man at all, and my, how they did swear at them two tramps for getting them way out here on a wild goose chase. But they're going to look for you just the same in Olathe, only they won't find you there, and she laughed a bit nervously though. It was dusk when Mr. Shorter returned from holiday, but after he heard his wife's story, he said he'd drive them two boys all the way to Mexico if there wasn't any better plan. Dodson's far enough, Bridge assured him, and late that night the grateful farmer set them down at their destination. An hour later they were speeding south on the Missouri Pacific. Bridge lay back luxuriously on the red plush of the smoker's seat. Some glass to us, eh, Bo? Asked Billy. Bridge stretched. The tide hounds race far up the shore, the hunt is on, the breakers roar. Her spars are tipped with gold, and o'er her deck the spray is flung. The buoys that frolic in the bay, they nod the way, they nod the way. The hunt is up, I am the prey, the hunter's bow is strung. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Return of the Mucker by Edgar Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Joe DeNoia, Somerset, New Jersey. Baby Bandits. It was 24 hours before Detective Sergeant Flanagan awoke to the fact that something had been put over on him, and that a Kansas farmer's wife had done the putting. He managed to piece it out finally from the narratives of the two tramps, and when he had returned to the Shorter home and listened to the contradictory and wholly sold improvisations of Shorter peer and Meir, he was convinced. Whereupon he immediately telegraphed Chicago headquarters and obtained the necessary authority to proceed upon the trail of the fugitive, Byrne. And so it was that Sergeant Flanagan landed in El Paso a few days later, drawn thither by various pieces of intelligence he had gathered en route, though with much delay and consequent vexation. Even after he had quitted the train he was none too sure that he was upon the right trail, though he at once repaired to a telegraph office and wired his chief that he was hot on the trail of the fugitive. As a matter of fact, he was much hotter than he had imagined, for Billy and Bridge were that very minute not 2 squares from him, debating as to the future and the best manner of meeting it before it arrived. "I think," said Billy, "that I'll duck across the border. I won't never be safe in little old U.S., and with things hopping in Mexico the way they have been for the last few years, I ought to be able to lose myself pretty well. Now you're all right, old top. You don't have to duck nothing, for you ain't did nothing. I don't know what you was running away from, but I know it ain't nothing the police is worrying about. I can tell that by the way you act, so I guess we'll split here. You'll be the boob to cross if you don't have to, for if Villa don't get you, the Carrancistas will, unless the Zapatistas nab you first. Coming or going, some greasy mugged highbinder's bound to croak you if you cross, from what little I've heard since we landed in El Paso. We'll feed up together tonight for the last time, then I'll pull my freight." He was silent for a while and then said, "I hate to do it, Bo, for you're the whitest guy I ever struck," which was a great deal for Billy Byrne of Grand Avenue to say. Bridge finished rolling a brown paper cigarette before he spoke. "Your words are pure and unadulterated wisdom, my friend," he said. "The chances are scarcely even that 2 gringo hobos would last the week out afoot and broke in Viva Mexico. But it has been many years since I followed the dictates of wisdom, therefore I'm going with you." Billy grinned. He could not conceal his pleasure. "You're past 21, he said, and dry behind the ears. Let's go and eat. There's still some of that 25 left." Together they entered a saloon which Bridges remembered as permitting a very large consumption of free lunch upon the purchase of a single schooner of beer. There were round tables scattered about the floor in front of the bar, and after purchasing their beer they carried it to one of these that stood in the far corner of the room close to a rear door. Here Bridge sat on guard over the foaming open sesame to food, while Billy crossed to the free lunch counter and appropriated all that a zealous attendant would permit him to carry off. When he returned to the table he took a chair with his back to the wall, in conformity to a habit of long standing when, as now, it had stood him in great stead to be in a position to see the other fellow at least as soon as the other fellow saw him. The other fellow being more often than not a large gentleman with a bit of shiny metal pinned to the left suspender strap. "That guy's a tight one," said Billy, jerking his hand in the direction of the guardian of the free lunch. "I scoop up about a good, square meal for a canary bird, and he makes me cough up half of it. Wants to know if I think I can go into the restaurant business on a 5-cent schooner of suds." Bridge laughed. "Well, you didn't do so badly at that," he said. "I know places where they'd indict you for grand larceny if it took more than what you have there." "Rotten beer," commented Billy. "Always is rotten down here," replied Bridge. "I sometimes think that they put mothballs in it so it won't spoil." Billy looked up and smiled. Then he raised his tall glass before him. "Here's to," he started, but he got no further. His eyes, traveling past his companion, fell upon the figure of a large man entering the low doorway. At the same instant the gentleman's eyes fell upon Billy. Recognition lit those of each simultaneously. The big man started across the room on a run, straight toward Billy Byrne. The latter leapt to his feet. Bridge, guessing what had happened, rose too. "Flanagan!" he exclaimed. The detective was tugging at his revolver, which had stuck in his hip pocket. Byrne reached for his own weapon. Bridge laid a hand on his arm. "Not that, Billy," he cried. "There's a door behind you. Here," and he pulled Billy backwards toward the doorway in the wall behind them. Byrne still clung to the schooner of beer which he had transferred to his left hand as he sought to draw his gun. Flanagan was close to them. Bridge opened the door and strove to pull Billy through, but the latter hesitated just an instant, for he saw that it would be impossible to close and bar the door, provided it had a bar, before Flanagan would be against it with his great shoulders. The policeman was still struggling to disentangle his revolver from the lining of his pocket. He was bellowing like a bull, yelling at Billy that he was under arrest. Men at the tables were at their feet. Those at the bar had turned around as Flanagan started to run across the floor. Now some of them were moving in the direction of the detective and his prey, but whether from curiosity or with sinister intentions it was difficult to say. One thing, however, is certain. If all the love that was felt for policemen in general by the men in that room could have been combined in a single individual, it was scarcely would have constituted a grand passion. Flanagan felt rather than saw that others were closing in on him, and then, fortunately for himself, he thought, he managed to draw his weapon. It was just as Billy was fading through the doorway into the room beyond. He saw the revolver gleam in the policeman's hand, and then it became evident why Billy had clung so tenaciously to his schooner of beer. Left-handed and hurriedly he threw it, but even Flanagan must have been constrained to admit that it was a good shot. It struck the detective directly in the midst of his features, gave him a nasty cut on the cheek as it broke, and filled his eyes full of beer, and beer never was intended as an eyewash. Spluttering and cursing, Flanagan came to a sudden stop, and when he had wiped the beer from his eyes he found that Billy Byrne had passed through the doorway and closed the door after him. The room in which Billy and Bridge found themselves was a small one, in the center of which was a large round table at which were gathered a half-dozen men at poker. Above the table swung a single arc lamp, casting a garish light upon the players beneath. Billy looked quickly about for another exit, only to find that besides the doorway through which he had entered there was but a single aperture in the four walls, a small window, heavily barred. The place was a veritable trap. At their hurried entrance the men had ceased their play, and one or two had risen in profane questioning and protest. Billy ignored them. He was standing with his shoulder against the door trying to secure it against the detective without, but there was neither bolt nor bar. Flanagan, hurling against the opposite side, exerted his noblest efforts to force an entrance into the room, but Billy Byrne's great weight held firm as Gibraltar. His mind revolved various wild plans of escape, but none bade fair to offer the slightest foothold to hope. The men at the table were clamoring for an explanation of the interruption. Two of them were approaching Billy with the vowed intention of turning him out, when he turned his head suddenly toward them. "Can the beef, you poor boobs," he cried. "There's a bunch of dicks out there. The joint's been pinched." Instantly pandemonium ensued. Cards, chips, and money were swept as by magic from the board. A dozen dog-eared and filthy magazines and newspapers were snatched from a hiding place beneath the table, and in the fraction of a second the room was transformed into a gambling place, to an innocent reading room. Billy grinned broadly. Flanagan had ceased his efforts to break down the door, and was endeavoring to persuade Billy that he might as well come out quietly and submit to arrest. Byrne had drawn his revolver again. Now he motioned to Bridge to come to his side. "Follow me," he whispered. "Don't move till I move. Then move sudden." Then turning to the door again, "You big stiff," he cried. "You couldn't take a crip to a hospital, let alone taking Billy Byrne to the still. Beat it before I come out and spread your beezer crust your map." If Billy had desired to arouse the ire of Detective Sergeant Flanagan by this little speech, he succeeded quite as well as he could have hoped. Flanagan commenced to growl and threaten, and presently again hurl himself against the door. Instantly Byrne wheeled and fired a single shot into the arc lamp. The shattered carbon rattled to the table with fragments of the globe, and Byrne stepped quickly to one side. The door flew open and Sergeant Flanagan drove headlong into the darkened room. A foot shot out from behind the open door, and Flanagan, striking it, sprawled upon his face amid the legs of the literary lights who held dog-eared magazines, right side up or upside down, as they chanced to have picked them up. Simultaneously Billy Byrne and Bridge dodged through the open doorway, banged the door to behind them, and sped across the barroom toward the street. As Flanagan shot into their midst, the men at the table leapt to their feet and bolted for the doorway, but the detective was up and after them so quickly that only two succeeded in getting out of the room. One of these generously slammed the door in the faces of his fellows, and there they pulled and hauled at each other until Flanagan was among them. In the pitch darkness he could recognize no one, but to be on the safe side he hid out promiscuously until he had driven them all from the door. Then he stood with his back toward it, the inmates of the room his prisoners. Thus he remained for a moment, threatening to shoot at the first sound of movement in the room, and then he opened the door again, and stepping just outside, ordered the prisoners to file out one at a time. As each man passed him, Flanagan scrutinized his face, and it was not until they had all emerged and he had re-entered the room with a light that had been discovered that once again his quarry had eluded him. Detective Sergeant Flanagan was peeved. The sun smote down upon the dusty road. A heat haze lay upon the arid land that stretched away upon either hand toward gray-brown hills. A little adobe hut, backed by a few squalid outbuildings, stood out, a screaming high light in its coat of whitewash, against a background that was garish with light. Two men plodded along the road. Their coats were off. The brims of their tattered hats were pulled down over eyes closed to mere slits against sun and dust. One of the men, glancing up at the distant hut, broke into verse. Yet then the sun was shining down, a-blazing on a little town, a mile or so way down the track, a-dancing in the sun. But somehow, as I waited there came a shiver in the air. The birds are flying south, he said, the winter has begun. His companion looked up at him who quoted. "There ain't no track," he said, "and that 'dobe shack don't look much like a town, but otherwise this nib's got our number all right, all right. We are the birds a-flying south, and Flanagan was the shiver in the air. Flanagan's a regular frost. Gee, but I bet you that guy's sore." "Why is it, Billy," asked Bridge after a moment's silence, "that upon occasion you speak King's English after the manner of the boulevard, and again after that of the back alley? Sometimes you say that and dat in the same sentence. Your conversational clashes are numerous. Surely something or someone had cramped your original style." "I was born and brought up on dat," explained Billy. "She taught me the other line of talk. Sometimes I forget. I had about 20 years of the other and only one of hers, and 20 to 1 is a long shot, more apt to lose than win." "She, I take it, is a Penelope," mused Bridge, half to himself. "She must have been a fine girl." "Fine isn't the right word," Billy corrected him. "If a thing's fine there may be something finer, and then something else finest. She was better than finest. She was... Why, Bridge, I'd have to be a walking dictionary to tell you what she was." Bridge made no reply, and the two trudged on toward the whitewashed hut in silence for several minutes. Then Bridge broke it. "And you, my sweet Penelope, out there somewhere you wait for me, with buds of roses in your hair and kisses on your mouth." Billy sighed and shook his head. "There ain't no such luck for me," he said. "She's married to another gink now." They came at last to the hut, upon the shady side of which they found a Mexican squatting, puffing upon a cigarette, while upon the doorstep sat a woman, evidently his wife, busily engaged in preparation of some manner of foodstuff contained in a large shallow vessel. About them played a couple of half-naked children, a baby sprawled upon a blanket just within the doorway. The man looked up suspiciously as the two approached. Bridge saluted him in fairly understandable Spanish, asking for food, and telling the man that they had money with which they could pay for a little. Not much, but a little. The Mexican slowly unfolded himself and arose, motioning the strangers to follow him to the interior of the hut. The woman, at a word from her lord and master, followed them, and at his further dictation brought them frijoles and tortillas. The price he asked was nominal, but his eyes never left Bridge's hands as the latter brought forth the money and handed it over. He appeared just a trifle disappointed when no more money than his stipulated purchase price was revealed to sight. "Where you going?" he asked. "We're looking for work," explained Bridge. "We want to get jobs on one of the American ranches or mines." "You better go back," warned the Mexican. "I myself have nothing against the Americans, senor, but there are many of my countrymen who do not like you. The Americans are all leaving. Some already have been killed by bandits. It is not safe to go further. Pesita's men are all about here. Even Mexicans are not safe from him. No one knows whether he's for Villa or Carranza. If he finds a Villa ranchero, then Pesita cries, 'Viva Carranza!' and his men kill and rob. If, on the other hand, a neighbor of the last victim hears of it in time, and later Pesita comes to him, he assures Pesita that he is for Carranza, whereupon Pesita cries, 'Viva Villa!' and falls upon the poor unfortunate, who is lucky if he escapes with his life. But Americans? Ah, Pesita asks them no questions. He hates them all, and kills them all, whenever he can lay his hands upon them. He has sworn to rid Mexico of the gringos." "What's the Dago talking about?" asked Billy. Bridge gave his companion a brief synopsis of the Mexican's conversation. "Only the gentleman is not an Italian, Billy. He's a Mexican." "Who said he was an Italian?" demanded Byrne. As the two Americans and the Mexican conversed within the hut, there approached across the dusty flat, from the direction of the nearest hills, a party of 5 horsemen. They rode rapidly, coming toward the hut from the side which had neither door nor window, so that those within had no warning of their coming. They were swarthy, ragged ruffians, fully armed, and with an equipment which suggested that they might be part of a quasi-military organization. Close behind the hut 4 of them dismounted, while a 5th, remaining in his saddle, held the bridle reins of the horses of his companions. The latter crept stealthily around the outside of the building toward the door, their carbines ready in their hands. It was one of the little children who first discovered the presence of the newcomers. With a piercing scream she bolted into the interior and ran to cling to her mother's skirts. Billy, Bridge, and the Mexican wheeled toward the doorway simultaneously to learn the cause of the girl's fright, and as they did so found themselves covered by 4 carbines in the hands of many men. As his eyes fell upon the faces of the intruders, the countenance of the Mexican fell, while his wife dropped to the floor and embraced his knees, weeping. "What in hell?" ejaculated Billy Byrne. "What's doing?" "We seem to have been made prisoners," suggested Bridge, "but whether by Villistas or Carranzistas I do not know." Their host understood his words and turned toward the 2 Americans. "These are Pesita's men," he said. "Yes," spoke one of the bandits, "we are Pesita's men, and Pesita will be delighted, Miguel, to greet you, especially when he sees the sort of company you've been keeping. You know how much Pesita loves the gringos." "But this man does not even know us," spoke up Bridge. "We stopped here to get a meal. He never saw us before. We are on our way to the El Orobo ranch, in search of work. We have no money and have broken no laws. Let us go our way in peace. You can gain nothing by detaining us, and as for Miguel here, that is what you called him, I believe. I think from what he said to us that he loves a gringo about as much as your revered chief seems to." Miguel looked his appreciation of Bridge's defense of him, but it was evident that he did not expect it to bear fruit. Nor did it. The brigand spokesman only grinned sardonically. "You may tell all this to Peseta himself, senor," he said. "Now come, get a move on. Beat it." The fellow had once worked in El Paso and took a great pride in his higher English education. As he started to herd them from the hut, Billy demurred. He turned toward Bridge. "Most of this talk gets by me," he said. "I ain't Jerry to all the dago jabber yet, though I've copped off a little of it in the past 2 weeks. Put me wise to the gink's lay." "Elementary, Watson, elementary," replied Bridge. "We are captured by bandits, and they are going to take us to their delightful chief, who will doubtless have a shot at sunrise." "Bandits?" snapped Billy, with a sneer. "Youse don't call these little runts bandits?" "Baby bandits, Billy, baby bandits," replied Bridge. "And you're going to stand for letting them pull off this rough stuff without handing them a comeback?" demanded Byrne. "We seem to be up against just that very thing," said Bridge. "There are 4 carbines quite ready for us. It would mean sudden death to resist now. Later we may find an opportunity. I think we'd better act simple and wait." He spoke in a quick, low whisper, for the spokesman of the brigands evidently understood a little English and was on the alert for any trickery. Billy shrugged, and when their captains again urged them forward, he went quietly. But the expression on his face might have perturbed the Mexicans had they known Billy Byrne of Grand Avenue better. He was smiling happily. Miguel had 2 ponies in his corral. These the brigands appropriated, placing Billy upon one and Miguel and Bridge upon the other, Billy's great weight rendering it inadvisable to double him up with another rider. As they were mounting, Billy leaned toward Bridge and whispered. "I'll get these guys, pal. Watch me," he said. "I am with thee, William. Horse, foot, and artillery," laughed Bridge. "Which reminds me," said Billy, "that I have an ace in the hole. The boobs never frisked me." "And I am reminded," returned Bridge, as the horse started off to the yank of hackamore ropes in the hands of the brigands who were leading them, "of a touching little thing of services. Just think, some night the stars will gleam upon the cold gray stone, and trace a name upon the silver beam, and lo, 'twill be my own." "You're a cheerful guy," was Billy's only comment. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of Return of the Mucker by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Joe Denoya, Somerset, New Jersey. In Peseta's camp. Peseta was a short, stocky man with a large, dark mustache. He attired himself after his own ideas of what should constitute the uniform of a general. Ideas more or less influenced and modified by the chance and caprice of fortune. At the moment that Billy, Bridge, and Miguel were dragged into his presence, his torso was enwrapped in a once resplendent coat covered with yards of gold braid. Upon his shoulder were brass epaulets, such as are connected only in one's mind with the ancient chorus ladies of the light operas of 15 or 20 years ago. Upon his legs were some rusty and ragged overalls. His feet were bare. He scowled ferociously at the prisoners while his lieutenant narrated the thrilling facts of their capture, thrilling by embellishment. "You are Americanos?" he asked of Bridge and Billy. Both agreed that they were. Then Peseta turned toward Miguel. "Where is Villa?" he asked. "How should I know, my general?" parried Miguel. "Who am I, a poor man with a tiny rancho, to know of the movements of the great ones of the earth? I did not even know where was the great General Peseta until now I am brought into his gracious presence, to throw myself at his feet and implore that I may be permitted to serve him in even the meanest of capacities." Peseta appeared not to hear what Miguel had said. He turned his shoulder toward the man and addressed Billy in broken English. "You were on your way to El Orobo Ranch, eh? Are you acquainted there?" he asked. Billy replied that they were not, merely looking for employment upon an American-owned ranch or in an American mine. "Why did you leave your own country?" asked Peseta. "What do you want here in Mexico?" "Well, old top," replied Billy, "you see de birds was flying south, and winter was in de air, and a fathead dick from Chi was on me trail. So I ducks." "Ducks?" queried Peseta, mystified. "Ah, the ducks. They fly south, I see." "Nah, you poor simp, I blows," explained Billy. "Ah, yes," agreed Peseta, not wishing to admit any ignorance of plain American even before a despised gringo. "But the large-faced dick, what might that be? I have spent much time in the States, but I do not know that." "I said fathead dick, that's a fly cop," Billy elucidated. "It is he, then, that is the bird." Peseta beamed at this evidence of his own sagacity. "He fly. Flanagan ain't no bird. Flanagan's a dub." Bridge came to the rescue. My erudite friend means, he explained, that the police chased him out of the United States of America. Peseta raised his eyebrows. All was now clear to him. But why did he not say so, he asked. He tried to, said Bridge. He did his best. Quit your kidding, admonished Billy. A bright light suddenly burst upon Peseta. He turned upon Bridge. Your friend is not then an American? He asked. I guessed it. That is why I cannot understand him. He speaks the language of the gringo less well even than I. From what country is he? Billy Byrne would have asserted with some show of asperity that he was nothing if not American, but Bridge was quick to see a possible loophole for escape for his friend in Peseta's belief that Billy was no gringo, and warned the latter to silence by a quick motion of his head. He's from Grand Avenue, he said. It's not exactly in Germany, but there are a great many Germans there. My friend is a native, so he don't speak German or English either. They have a language of their own in Grand Avenue. I see, said Peseta. A German colony. I like the Germans. They furnish me with much ammunition and rifles. They are my very good friends. Take Miguel and the gringo away. This to the soldiers who have brought the prisoners to him. I will speak further with this man from Grand Avenue. When the others had passed out of hearing, Peseta addressed Billy. I am sorry, senor, he said, that you have been put to so much inconvenience. My men could not know that you were not a gringo, but I can make it all right. I will make it all right. You are a big man. The gringos have chased you from their country as they chased me. I hate them. You hate them. But enough of them. You have no business in Mexico except to seek work. I give you work. You are big. You are strong. You are like a bull. You stay with me, senor, and I make you captain. I need men that can talk some English and look like a gringo. You do fine. We make much money, you and I. We make it all time while we fight to liberate my poor Mexico. When Mexico liberate, we fight some more to liberate her again. The Germans, they give me much money to liberate Mexico, and there are other ways of getting much money when one is riding around through a rich country with soldiers liberating his poor, bleeding country, sabe? Yep, I guess I savvy, said Billy. And it listens all right to me, far as you've gone. My pal in on it? You make my friend a captain, too? Peseta held up his hands and rolled his eyes in holy horror. Take a gringo into his band? It was unthinkable. He shot, he cried. I swear to kill all gringo. I become savior of my country. I rid her of all Americanos. Nix on the captain stuff for me then, said Billy firmly. That guy's a right one. If any big stiff thinks he can croak little old Bridge while Billy Byrne's around, he's got another thing coming. Why, me and him's just like brothers. You like this gringo? Asked Peseta. You bet, cried Billy. Peseta thought for several minutes. In his mind was a scheme which required the help of just such an individual as this stranger. Someone who was utterly unknown in the surrounding country, and whose presence in town could not by any stretch of the imagination be connected in any way with the bandit Peseta. I tell you, he said, I let your friend go. I send him under safe escort to El Robo Ranch. Maybe he help us there after a while. If you stay, I let him go. Otherwise, I shoot you both with Miguel. What you got it in for Mig for? Asked Billy. He's a harmless sort of guy. He's Velista. Velista with gringos run Mexico. Gringos and the church. Just like Huerta would have done if they'd have given him a chance. Only Huerta more for church than for gringos. Let the poor boob go, urged Billy, and I'll come along with you. Why, he's got a wife and kids. You wouldn't want to leave them without no one to look after them in this godforsaken country. Peseta grinned indulgently. Very well, Senor Captain, he said, bowing low. I let Miguel and your honorable friend go. I send safe escort with them. Bully for you, old pot, exclaimed Billy, and Peseta smiled delightedly in the belief that some complimentary title had been applied to him in the language of Grand Avenue. I'll go and tell them, said Billy. Yes, said Peseta, and say to them that they will start early in the morning. As Billy turned and walked in the direction that the soldiers had led Bridge and Miguel, Peseta beckoned to a soldier who leaned upon his gun at a short distance from his general, a barefooted, slovenly attempt at a headquarters orderly. Send Captain Rosales to me, directed Peseta. The soldier shuffled away to where a little circle of men in wide-brimmed, metal-encrusted hats squatted in the shade of a tree, chatting, laughing, and rolling cigarettes. He saluted one of these and delivered his message, whereupon the tall, gaunt Captain Rosales arose and came over to Peseta. The big one who you brought in today is not a gringo, said Peseta, by way of opening the conversation. He is from Grand Avenue. He can be of great service to us, for he is very friendly with the Germans. Yet he looks like a gringo and could pass for one. We can utilize him. Also, he is very large and appears to be equally strong. He should make a good fighter, and we have none too many. I have made him captain. Rosales grinned. Already among Peseta's following of 100 men there were 15 captains. "Where is Grand Avenue?" asked Rosales. "You mean to say, my dear captain," exclaimed Peseta, "that a man of your education does not know where Grand Avenue is? I am surprised. Why, it is a German colony." "Yes, of course. I recall it well now. For the moment it had slipped my mind. My grandfather, who was a great traveler, was there many times. I have heard him speak of it often." "But I did not summon you that we might discuss European geography," interrupted Peseta. "I sent for you to tell you that the stranger will not consent to serve me unless I liberated his friend, the gringo, and that sneaky spy of a Miguel. I was forced to yield, for we can use the stranger. So I have promised, my dear captain, that I shall send them upon their road with a safe escort in the morning, and you shall command the guard. Upon your life, respect my promise, Rosales. But if some of these cutthroats should fall upon you, and in the battle while you were trying to defend the gringo and Miguel, both should be slain by the bullets of the ballistas, but it would be deplorable, Rosales. But it would not be your fault. Who, indeed, could blame you who had fought well and risked your men and yourself in the performance of your sacred duty? Rosales, should such a thing occur, what could I do in token of my great pleasure other than make you colonel?" "I shall defend them with my life, my general," cried Rosales, bowing low. "Good," cried Peseta. "That is all." Rosales started back toward the ring of smokers. "Ah, captain," cried Peseta, "another thing. Will you make it known to the other officers that the stranger from Grand Avenue is a captain, and that it is my wish that he be well treated, but not told so much as might injure him or his usefulness about our sacred work of liberating poor, bleeding, unhappy Mexico?" Again Rosales bowed and departed. This time he was not recalled. Billy found Bridge and Miguel squatting on the ground, with two dirty-faced peons standing guard over them. The latter were some little distance away. They made no objection when Billy approached the prisoners, though they had looked in mild surprise when they saw him crossing toward them without a guard. Billy sat down beside Bridge and broke into a laugh. "What's the joke?" asked Bridge. "Are we going to be hanged instead of being shot?" "We ain't going to be either," said Billy, "and I'm a captain. What do you know about that?" He explained all that had taken place between himself and Peseta, while Bridge and Miguel listened attentively to his every word. "I thought it was about the only way for us," said Billy. "We were in worse than I thought." "Can the Bowery stuff, Billy," cried Bridge, "and talk like a white man. You can, you know." "All right, Bo," cried Billy, good naturedly. "You see I forget when there is anything pressing like this to chew about. Then I fall back into the old lingo. Well, as I was saying, I didn't want to do it unless you would stay, too, but he wouldn't have you. He has it in for all gringos, and that bull you passed him about me being from a foreign country called Grand Avenue, he fell for it like a rube for the tapped wire stuff. He said if I wouldn't stay and help him he'd croak the bunch of us." "How about that ace in the hole you were telling me about?" asked Bridge. "I still got it," and Billy fondled something hard that swung under his left arm beneath his shirt. "But Lord, man, what could I do against the whole bunch? I might get a few of them, but they get us all in the end. The other way is better, though I hate to have to split with you, old man." He was silent for a moment, looking hard at the ground. Bridge whistled and cleared his throat. "I've always wanted to spend a year in Rio," he said. "We'll meet there when you can make your getaway." "You said it," agreed Byrne. "It's Rio as soon as we can make it. Peseta's promised to send you both loose in the morning and send you under safe escort. Miguel to his happy home and you to El Orobo Ranch. I guess the old stiff ain't so bad after all." Miguel had pricked up his ears at the sound of the word escort. He leaned far forward, closer to the two Americans, and whispered. "Who is to command the escort?" he asked. "I dunno," said Billy. "What difference does it make?" "It makes all the difference between life and death for your friend and for me," said Miguel. "There's no reason why I should need an escort. I know my way throughout all Chihuahua, as well as Peseta or any of his cutthroats. I have come and gone all my life without an escort. Of course, your friend is different. It might be well for him to have company to El Orobo. Maybe it is all right, but wait until we learn who commands the escort. I know Peseta well. I know his methods. If Rosales rides out with us tomorrow morning, you may say goodbye to your friend forever, and you will never see him in Rio, or elsewhere. He and I will be dead before 10 o'clock. "What makes you think that, Bo?" demanded Billy. "I do not think, senor," replied Miguel. "I know." "Well," said Billy, "we'll wait and see." "If it is Rosales, say nothing," said Miguel. "It would do no good, but we may then be on the watch, and if possible you might find the means to obtain a couple of revolvers for us, in which case He shrugged and permitted a faint smile to flex his lips. As they talked a soldier came and announced that they were no longer prisoners, that they were to have the freedom of the camp. "But," he concluded, "the general requests that you do not pass beyond the limits of the camp. There are many desperados in the hills, and he fears for your safety, now that you are his guests." The man spoke Spanish, so that it was necessary that Bridge interpret his words for the benefit of Billy, who had understood only part of what he said. "Ask him," said Byrne, "if that stuff goes for me too." He said no, replied Bridge, after questioning the soldier. That the captain is now one of them, and may go and come and do as the other officers. Such are Pesita's orders. Billy arose. The messenger had returned to his post at headquarters. The guard had withdrawn, leaving the three men alone. "So long, old man," said Billy. "If I'm going to be any help to you and Big, the less I'm seen with you the better. I'll blow over and mix with the Dago bunch, and practice sitting on my heels. It seems to be the right dope down here, and I gotta learn all I can about being a greaser, seeing that I've turned one." "Goodbye, Billy. Remember Rio," said Bridge. "And the revolvers, senor," added Miguel. "You bet," replied Billy, and strolled off in the direction of the little circle of cigarette smokers. As he approached them, Rosales looked up and smiled, then rising, extended his hand. "Senor Captain," he said, "we welcome you. I am Captain Rosales." He hesitated, waiting for Billy to give his name. "My moniker's Byrne," said Billy. "Pleased to meet you, Cap." "Ah, Captain Byrne," said Rosales, proceeding to introduce the newcomer to his fellow officers. Several, like Rosales, were educated men who had been officers in the army under former regimes, but had turned bandit as the safer alternative to suffering immediate death at the hands of the faction then in power. The others, for the most part, were pure-blooded Indians whose adult lives had been spent in outlawry and brigandage. All were small of stature beside the giant Byrne. Rosales and two others spoke English. With those Billy conversed. He tried to learn from them the name of the officer who was to command the escort that was to accompany Bridge and Miguel into the valley on the morrow, but Rosales and the others assured him that they did not know. When he had asked the question, Billy had been looking straight at Rosales, and he had seen the man's pupils contract, and noticed the slight backward movement of the body, which also denotes determination. Billy knew, therefore, that Rosales was lying. He did not know who was to command the escort, and there was something sinister in that knowledge, or the fellow would not have denied it. The American began to consider plans for saving his friend from the fate which Pesita had outlined for him. Rosales, too, was thinking rapidly. He was no fool. Why had the stranger desired to know who was to command the escort? He knew none of the officers personally. What difference, then, did it make to him who rode out on the morrow with his friend? Ah, but Miguel knew that it would make a difference. Miguel had spoken to the new captain and aroused his suspicions. Rosales excused himself and rose. A moment later he was in conversation with Pesita, unburdening himself of his suspicions and outlining a plan. "Do not send me in charge of the escort," he advised. "Send Captain Byrne himself." Pesita pooh-poohed the idea. "But wait," urged Rosales. "Let the stranger ride in command, with a half-dozen picked men who will see that nothing goes wrong. An hour before dawn I will send 2 men. They will be our best shots on ahead. They will stop at a place we both know, and about noon the Captain Byrne and his escort will ride back to the camp and tell us that they were attacked by a troop of Villa's men, and that both our guests were killed. It will be sad, but it will not be our fault. We will swear vengeance against Villa, and the Captain Byrne will hate him as good as a pesitista should." "You have the cunning of the coyote, my captain," cried Pesita. "It shall be done as you suggest. Go now. I will send for Captain Byrne, and give him his orders for the morning." As Rosales strolled away, a figure rose from the shadows at the side of Pesita's tent and slunk off into darkness. End of chapter 7.